Hey guys, welcome to this video. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. If you haven't seen these videos before, welcome back if you have. My intention is unity and oneness and the highest levels of love light. I'm going to try to get this video out as quickly as I can. I am a little limited on time today. This is an Equinox energy sharing video. I want to talk a little energy update, and then my intention is to go into a little flow. The first thing I want to start with is the untethering. So from my perspective, everything lately has been amped up, right? The energies have been amped up, and this has been ongoing, we could say, for years. I've gotten used to it. Many of you watching this video are used to it. So for those who are new to these videos, what are you used to? Well, what we used to refer to as ascension symptoms, I call them activation sequences, moments of recognition, moments of resistance, moments of highs and lows that are just everything's amplified. And so this can sometimes show up for us in the form of physical symptoms, meaning high electrical stimulation, trouble sleeping, dizziness, right? And I'm not even going to list all of the ascension symptoms, because just like this journey is a unique, individual, diverse expression for all of us, it's also a unique individual interpretation for all of us. So what we're experiencing and how we're experiencing it is solely based on our perspective, where we are now, moment to moment to moment. And so therefore, the symptoms for everybody will change. They will look and feel different. So pretty much we could say anything can be a symptom that we're not used to necessarily experiencing until we experience them through these highs and lows. Oh, I usually sleep with no problem. Now I'm having trouble sleeping. The funny part about it is we could say it's because of the solar flares. We could say it's because of the equinox. We could say because the full moon. We could say it's because Mercury's in retrograde. But ultimately, everything is giving us the push and the pull, the electromagnetic energy, the pulses that we need from one perspective in order to expand our fill in the blanks, our perspective, our consciousness, our reality, our dimension, our vibration. So for me, ascension to me is really just expansion. And what happens when we expand into this bigger space, it can feel too big. We can have moments, and I've done a video a couple videos ago on this about feeling too powerful. We could feel too high. We could feel untethered and too unattached and floaty and spacey. And then we go through these periods of what one might refer to, and I was having this beautiful conversation with two of my sisters the other day about this, of contraction. And sometimes that contraction can feel more comfortable, actually, because we're used to being in this container, and then all of a sudden, pop, we go out into this container and we're spun out. Like, whoa, put me back into my little container so I can feel safe and secure. And I'm not going to go over that again because that was a previous video, but that's part of an ongoing feeling that many of us are experiencing, especially with the recent energies of the equinox. In addition to that, what's happening in our system is we are physically responding to our higher expression of consciousness. And this is not necessarily meant to be taken literal. I like to play with the words on this. So when I say higher expression of consciousness, for me, it's a higher sound. It's a higher resonance. We're taking up residence in a higher alchemy set, a higher symphony. And that causes, and of course, it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Is that the cause, or is that the effect? It's not relevant for this particular sharing or video. Essentially, it is what it is. It's happening. So we then have to acclimate as our spiritual scuba divers that are diving out into this higher atmosphere. So we're going to experience these higher atmospheric pressures. So what may be from one perspective seen as a contraction and expansion is actually a higher percussion chamber in which we are contracting in order to allow these bandwidths, these sounds to shift, or for our, it's like changing gears on a bicycle. You ever changed a gear on a bicycle and you're not in the right gear? So it's like you're shifting gears, but sometimes you have to downshift or contract or alkalize is one of the words that's coming through, but acclimate to these higher frequencies. And that requires us to shift. Sometimes we'll have pops in our ears. We'll feel pops in our body. We'll feel things move oddly. We'll be guided to move and make different sounds than what we're used to making. So I could go into so many different examples of what people are experiencing right now as they're going through this process. It's an internal process that's being, I was going to say externalized, but it is an internal process that we're then bringing into physicality. So oftentimes, again, it looks different for everyone, but this has been a massive shift. So again, being really present with what it is we're feeling and experiencing, and not necessarily judging the fact that we feel too expansive or too contracted. It's this constant pulsation is what I've been kind of guided to share with everyone, just as a gentle reminder to be gentle on ourselves, because our bodies, our way of communicating, the planetary alignments, nothing is the same. The sun, the relationship that we have with the planets, everything is changing. And so, from my perspective, so as we evolve, as this evolution revolution reveals to us what it is that's been hidden inside of us the whole time, we begin to feel feelings around what it is that we are feeling, expressing, remembering. We're expressing in a different way. We're communicating with our bodies in a different way, or our body is communicating with us in a different way. And we become more aware, which can feel raw. It can feel very ethereal and blissful at times, and it can feel very dark and gosh, so many different things. It can feel so many different things. So we can feel so many different things. So essentially, that's it in a nutshell. And I could sum up this ascension experience just by saying what I just stated. So I've been called to get back to the basics again and again and again, because what happens is if we're not grounded into our own bodies and we're not learning how to stabilize our frequencies, we become untethered. And it can be difficult. It's like that balloon, you know? Have you ever had that dream where you're getting pulled up so high that you can't get back down to safety? Yet it isn't just about getting back down. It's about us feeling safe, secure, and whole, complete within this new realm of being. And it takes time because we're dealing with gravity here. We're creating gravity. We're creating a spin that harnesses our energy from within. Externally, we're externalizing the internal, and we're creating it in our reality. So as these things bubble up from within us, or we remember, recognize, see, feel, hear everything differently, we have to then learn how to bring ourselves into a space where we feel a little bit more stable, if that makes sense. It's not always easy, and it's not always going to be the same. But if we have a baseline, that becomes our new foundation in order to launch ourselves off of. We have a landing pad, a launching pad. So not only can we come back to it, but we can launch ourselves off to it. And we can kind of tie that string to this launching pad, which I'm going to refer to as a higher dimensional plane of existence, in which we can remind ourselves, I am here in this body now. This is my launching pad. This is my landing pad. Wherever it is that I am, and these are for those people who are like, what is happening? I am here in this body now. No matter how far out my consciousness is going, no matter where my dreams are taking me, no matter if I'm astral projecting and diving into Middle Earth and having all of these revelations and communication from my guides, and I'm hearing and seeing, always coming back to our landing pad, our body. Then it allows us that opportunity to make the appropriate adjustments that we need to make in order to streamline this process. So it is all about surfing, finding that balance, right? Interpreting the wave by what we're feeling as we move in our bodies on the surfboard, right? Do we need to turn a little to the left? Do we need to turn a little to the right? Do we need to jump into the water or attach that leash, right? So that leash is our string and our surfboard is our body. It's our landing, what did I call it earlier? Landing base, launching pad. It's both. Not only does it help us to ride the waves, but it also helps us to launch off the wave, to go through that barrel, whatever we, not that I'm a surfer, but I'm using that as an example because it's really important to recognize that sometimes as we're going through this process, myself included, we can get really caught up in the wave and forget that we're still in this body. And our body, that is a disconnect. We could forget to eat. We could forget to drink water, right? We can forget to ground. And sometimes we can forget about doing our laundry. So even though we might be eating and drinking and following that protocol, we might be forgetting that, oh yeah, I do have responsibilities. I have this other thing in my life that I still need to participate in order to stabilize my life in this body, even though it's not necessarily attached to this body, such as doing the laundry, right? We still have to maintain equilibrium in all aspects. And that's part of why we're going through this. How do we do that? So that was one of the biggest messages that was coming through. If we are going through these upgrades, and that's what I refer to as ascension symptoms, or I'm going through an upgrade, I'm processing, I'm integrating, I'm expanding, I'm evolving, becoming masters of this process. So then it becomes stabilized. We don't necessarily fall off the surfboard and get lost in the undertow, in the undercurrents. We don't necessarily continually ride the surfboard and then forget that eventually we have to come home, make dinner, recharge our batteries, and then go out again and catch the next wave. So we're always finding this balance. So that's the message that's been coming through. So how do we do that? I pulled out my tuning fork the other day. Hadn't used that on myself in a while. I use it all the time with clients. I use it in sessions, right? So if you guys don't have this, I highly recommend it. Mine's 528, 528. You could do 432. I think there's an 850 something. Look it up. Those are the numbers I like to play with. And you can utilize the tuning fork, move it in around your body, right? Use it as a tool. Pull out those tools from the toolbox. I have crystal bowls that I use, you know, and of course, grounding, anchoring that frequency. One of the things that I do in my own life, and I teach this as well, and I'm just sharing with you guys, and you probably, many of you know this watching already, but sometimes it's nice to have that reminder, is acknowledge, how am I feeling in my body now? Okay, I feel a little untethered today. Maybe I shouldn't fast. Maybe I should focus on eating a nice big hearty breakfast that keeps me in my body, that anchors me down just a bit so I don't get lost in all of these frequencies. It might be the opposite for you. You might feel like you're in that undertow, right? You're in that current and you don't know how to get out of it. Call a friend, you know, realize that that lifeline is attached to something. The leash doesn't break off. You have that connection point, but you just have to restore it. Realize this too shall pass, right? So just really constantly checking in with ourselves. And that's the other key, is the words that were coming through are internal to external. So recognizing that if we're seeing all this other stuff that's going on, that's unfolding around us, but we're not in our bodies, So that stuff that's happening outside of us, whether it be something going on about disclosure, or something going on about the government, or something going on with our family, whatever it might be, that we feel really pulled into. If we're not embodying, and we're not grounded isn't even the right word, centered, that spin over there, that spin over here is going to spin us out if we focus too much of our attention on that, on top of not focusing inwardly. And it always comes back to know thyself, do the inner work. All of that is now even more important than it ever was, more than it ever was. And the days go by. Anywho, so when we're operating as multidimensional beings, right? Maybe don't go by locating or astral projecting when we're not feeling connected to our bodies. And this might seem boring, but this is how people during these transitions end up unbalanced, making choices that are not connected to the truth. They're connected to someone else's truth, or they're connected to a fear that we are essentially in the process of integrating. But because we haven't done the work, meaning sat down and meditated for 20 minutes, checked in, am I breathing? Oh, conscious breathing, right? Of course we're breathing, but when was the last time I consciously connected with my breath? When was the last time I consciously made my intention for my day? Did I make my bed today? You know, just basic things that we sometimes can just forget when we're caught up in whatever it is that we're caught up in. And again, that's the other spins, because everything is spinning. So right now, centering, get back into the center of our own gravitational pull, our poles, our rod and thy staff, right? So finding that centering during the wobble that's going on right now. Okay, what else was coming through? Grid work just popped into my head. So a lot of us are awakening to our higher purpose. There's a lot of people that have been called to do more grid work. There's a lot of people who have been, oh, okay. So the expansion. What I was shown was, and I talked about this in either my previous video or the video before that, I can't remember, the Rolodex. And it was so funny because my sister, Candace, was like mentioning Rolodex the other day. And I'm like, that's exactly what I was seeing. And my other friend, I want to share their examples, because part of what this is about is sharing this experience with other like-minded individuals. So talking about it, but also if you're just now having these experiences, there is an element that not everybody's having the same experience as we are. So if you're really just now opening your third eye, or you had a Kundalini experience or whatever it might be, it may not be that you want to go to church and tell everybody you saw God or whatever it might be. I had an angel come visit me. Not everybody's on the same level. And this isn't a hierarchy thing. Let me rephrase that. Not everybody is expanded to the same place. Some people are in contraction while you're in expansion. So it's kind of meeting people where they're at. And we get that when we learn discernment. So when we realize when we're centered, now is not the appropriate time to start speaking light language. I've said this many times at the grocery store, for example. I mean, maybe that's your jam. I don't know. But from my perspective, just to share, because this is my channel, I don't go around doing that just to everybody. I wanted to when I first started speaking light language. And sometimes my discernment when I am spun out isn't always 100%. So have I done that before? In a way, yes. You know, I bombarded my family with it, that's for sure, and my husband. And then what happens is they will recoil because they're not in that space that I'm in. And again, it's not because I'm better than or more advanced than they are. We're just in different vibrations. And then that, if we're not fully integrated in who we are, we're not in our full confidence of this is who I am, we're just starting to kind of branch out and explore. Their dismissal would be maybe a word, or rejection of where you're at can sometimes set us back, because it's like when you see an enemy gets poked and it closes up because it was branching out, and not an enemy, there's another, I don't know what they're called, but anyways, and it closes up. So we want to exercise those muscles. We want to expand, but using our discernment to see what groups, because part of the message that I've been getting is this is all security. A lot of what people are experiencing is lack of feeling stable and secure. So if we're searching for stability and security in someone else validating our experience, and we're not already centered and stable in knowing that this is our experience and we don't need that validation in order to make us complete and whole, we're going to receive, get more of that destabilizing, if that makes sense, because we're looking for something external to reinforce the internal, but the internal is not balanced. I think a bubble just came out. Therefore, what we're externalizing is a representation of what we're not 100% comfortable with in ourselves. And I'm just sharing. It isn't always the case. Sometimes it's just somebody else that is perhaps externalizing their fear about something that's been activated within them, or their own rejection. But again, that's discernment. That's us knowing that that's not mine, that's theirs, right? And so there becomes this push and pull of coming back in order to not avoid, but it's the avoidance. It's the dance between the two of recognizing that not everybody is going to accept me. So I might want to let my freak flag fly, but that doesn't mean I need to project it on everybody else. And if they don't accept me, well, then poo on them. That's a different video. But that is an example of what's happening right now. People are searching for that external validation. And when people don't give them what they're searching for in order to make them feel whole and complete, then they are projecting onto someone else. Well, there's something wrong with you. So that's something else to be aware of. That then leads to judgment on others. And again, that reflects back an externalization of us judging ourselves, even though we may not realize it. And it may not be that area that we're judging ourselves in, but it might be something else, so it's being aware of this constant play. What scene are we acting in? Are we needing to be seen in order to act out in externalization of who we are internally? And ultimately, no one needs to get us. However, back to what I was saying earlier, it's nice to have a group or that one person who gets you. And so that's where sometimes we may need to go back within and seek and you shall find. Not seeking an external for validation, just being comfortable to talk about it with someone. It could be a therapist. It could be someplace in a safe environment. It could be, your energy healer. It could be your shaman. It could be your Reiki healer. It could be your massage therapist, whoever. But being able to at least express some of these things is really important for some people, for a lot of people, for most people. And if that hasn't happened, being open to that without looking for it is okay too, because sometimes it'll just come naturally. It'll come organically. Wow, I could go into so much more. As I talk about this, my consciousness, my whatever we want to call it, goes into so many different areas and arenas in the collective of what the collective is experiencing, because that's where I like to play and see, well, how can this help? How can this help? How can this serve for the greater good? This message. And so as we do this, we become more centered and balanced, and we gain more clarity about what it is that we are integrating. We gain more clarity about our experience, right? And we become more clear on when I say that, I'm just seeing clear, like we clear things faster. We're then not locked into an old programming or a paradigm. Okay, let me just pause for a moment and get back into this space. So the security is huge. I've been noticing what's happening is a lot of people's root chakra has been destabilized. Earth, star, root, sacral, solar plexus. So when we have, sometimes people activate their other energy centers and they're not in their body when this happens. And this is sometimes can create someone who is highly psychic, highly aware, hearing voices, but they're not able to differentiate between their own center, their own guidance system, and all the other stuff that's going on out there. And that has to do sometimes with not being grounded in the body, not being here present and being able to differentiate what's mine and what's theirs. So that's, some of us are here to ground this energy, to anchor this energy, because and to teach how to do that. So if you're one of those people out there who've already gone through this, it's not necessarily that I'm going to go out and tell everybody about this, but if you found this channel, maybe it's so that you could get some tips on how to share this with other people. Maybe it's because you needed a tip on how to get grounded. Maybe it's because someone else in my list of playlists could help, right? So it's recognizing that there's always options. There isn't just one answer or one solution to everything that's happening and everything that's going on. So our security has really been, for a lot of people, shaken up a little bit. Because going back to what I was saying earlier, the more we expand, the more we see. And the more we see, if we haven't processed those things, what do we see? We see our weaknesses, we see our strengths, we see our power, we see our shadow, we see other people's stuff, we see the collective stuff, whatever it might be that we're witnessing, that we're observing, and that we're in the process of changing our perspective on, expanding, right? Bird's eye view, seeing everything below us. We see the distortions, or we feel these distortions, which are uncomfortable. And so this can shake the very essence of who we think we are. That can cause us to become untethered. Well, if I'm not so-and-so, who am I? If I'm no longer who I thought I was, where does that leave me? Where does that leave me in my relationship? And so really just being gentle with ourselves and not necessarily making any rash decisions right when you're in it, when you're in the undertow, or when you're riding that cloud. Because sometimes when we're up here, that doesn't always last forever. It's not sustainable. And that's the next thing I've talked about. I feel like I'm going to be talking about this a lot. There are those high energy blasts, and I love it when we have these blasts. I'm like, yes. And some people can get that energy, ride that wave, and ride through the tired cycle that comes after the crash and burn, like my friend Candace. But like my friend Jess and I were talking about, it's like, nope, crash and burn. I'm kind of in the middle. It's like the energy eater, the shadow eater. You're going to eat it, you're going to digest it, you're going to integrate it, you're going to compost it and use it for more fuel and energy. But ultimately, there always comes a time when we have to reset our batteries, whether it be sleep, whether it be meditation, a hot bath, even a cold, was it cryotherapy, all these different, whatever it is we need in order, what are the chambers where you can lay in water, pods? That might be whatever works for us, crystals, my point is, if we're constantly riding that wave and we don't ever come home for dinner, we're going to burn the candle out at both ends. I've talked about this a lot. And that's another thing that can cause us to be untethered. And again, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, sometimes we do all those other things and then we can't find our way back because we've been so spun out in all these other directions that it actually takes us longer to integrate the emotions, the feelings, right? And we're actually creating more imbalances in our body, but we're not necessarily aware of it because we're not in our bodies, even, connected. We're not making the connection. And I've done this, and this is why I'm sharing this with you guys through my Kundalini experiences. Sometimes I've had the most amazing healing sessions lately. I mean, and I'm not saying this from an egoic perspective. I am going through what I've gone through so that I could teach it to others how to do it, or to help raise the frequency and vibration, or to help process the shadow, to share my experience. And so I've now learned through my own experience and going through it, what not to do. Apparently, in some cases, I like to learn the hard way. Maybe some of you can relate. So you look back on it and go, wow, I didn't need to have to go through that. If only I would have done this. But on the flip side, going through the process of being super high and not being in my body that caused body imbalances and sugar addiction has now brought me to, when I go to reach for that cupcake, I think, ooh, maybe I should have some protein first, whatever that protein looks like for you, to help, ground me, or maybe some root vegetables or whatever it might be. And then if I still want that sugar, maybe then I just want sugar. Maybe I'm just going to enjoy it and not judge myself for having it, but not always reaching for that because I'm like, I need sugar right now. So I'm sharing that because for those of you who have had these Kundalini experiences, I utilize this in healing when I'm working with, well, every time I work with someone, it's completely different. Meaning, I might work with the same person 5 times and it's the same, very similar all 5 times. Or it might be completely different every time I work with that person. Or my other example is I might work with this person 5 times. I might work with this other person 5 times, and the experience is not the same at all. But that's just that's how I roll. I love that. My point is not getting locked into any particular experience and judging, well, it didn't happen this way, so I must be doing it wrong. I didn't have a Kundalini activation, I must not be activated. For some people, they're not having that because they're going through it in a different order. There's no wrong or right. It's just an experience. So sometimes when we get untethered, we can fall into that wave of, am I doing this right? Why is that person experiencing this and I'm not? That's a form of judgment, right? That's a form of, it can also be utilized as comparison, but not comparing our experience to other people's experiences. Now, sometimes that can be used as a jumping board. Well, I want to have that experience. Okay, well, then we set our intention. We invite ourselves, we ask ourselves, would that be something for my highest and greatest good? And we might get a no. Maybe we've already been there, done that, and in this lifetime, it's not part of our protocol. Let's play on words. Okay, so I kind of just bounced all over the place with those messages. I hope that gave some clarity on just how important it is for us to realize that these insecurities that are coming up are literally the root being pulled up. The roots are being pulled up. And everything that's underneath the roots, all that dirt, is showing itself to us. And we're kind of in the process of rerouting our root, our sacral, our solar plexus in this new, I could say, plane of existence, dimension. And I know that each of those are different. And you might listen to a teacher that says, well, this is different than that, whatever. This is a generalization. Whatever resonates with you. It's an uprooting, literally uprooting. So as we lift off, we're like, whoa, there's my roots. Quick, let's anchor those back in. But we're anchoring in to another realm. However, our original tether is always connected to source energy from my perspective, and always connected to the deep essence of Mother Earth. Okay, so I'm just going to go into a little flow. I feel like I skipped. I could go so much on the covered a lot there. Let's just go into a little flow. I guess that was the end of the energy update. I'm being called to go into what to expect. So some people are asking, well, what can I expect next? And it's funny because I'm really good at telling other people that, but it's difficult for me to see it from from myself sometimes. And so I'm being called to talk about the Rolodex again. Ooh, okay. So how do I put this into words? Well, the Rolodex has come up a couple of times, and I talked about this in a previous video. So what I was shown, and I talked about this before, was a Rolodex and you open up the Rolodex and you go through the cards. It's an old system of organization to keep, it's like an address book, but it was on a roller, right? So you would flip it and it would spin and you could get, alphabetized who you were trying to connect with. What I was shown is that each Rolodex or each card in this address book has information on it. It has an address, a name, and whatever information was stored on that Rolodex. Some people maybe had a birth date in there, and some people had an email, and so on and so forth. And I was shown that that Rolodex has been spun. And before, we might have just pulled out a card, and then I just saw the cards kind of going everywhere, floating all around. And it's like, whoa. So untethered, essentially. It's not stuck in a particular node anymore. So that Rolodex is, or information card holds information. So let me give an example of what that information looks like. So we have access to the Rolodex, not just my Rolodex or your Rolodex. It is the higher deck. We have expanded our memory card. It's a bigger adapter. And so what we had access to has now opened to more. And this is another going back to why it's important to really be stable. Because many people want to jump into that, but they haven't done their basic, we're still here on Earth. And whether we want to call it Terra, Eartha, Earth, it's still Earth. It's a version of Earth. And we're still required to do things that we would have to do in order to stay on Earth. Again, the basics. So, it's challenging, guys. The energies are so strong right now. And the more I talk about these things, and the more my consciousness goes out there, and the more I contemplate all of this and bring it through, the higher I feel. So I'm going to have to get off this video and go ground in order to bring myself into equilibrium so that I'm not crazy-eyed walking around. No guarantees that I still won't be crazy-eyed walking around. It's pretty normal for me. But again, this is the difference between being able to ground it, embody it, teach it, share it, versus talking to ourselves, speaking light language, walking down the street, which I do anyways, but I do it on my phone and record it, so it's not as crazy. You get where I'm going with that. And there's no judgment on that. If that's the experience that someone is unconsciously choosing to have or consciously choosing to have, that is their experience. But that isn't my choice and how I want to express this and experience it. I want to be able to embody it and utilize it rather than allow it to get me completely spun out. So if you look at a Rolodex card, let's say it's a card of information in an address book, it's not just the name of the person that we're having access to. We have their phone number, we have their email, we have their address. So you have this whole access. But what's inside of that is a location. It is a memory associated with that person, place, or thing. We have the memory attached to that location. We have the memory of the connection through how we feel when we type up an email to them. We have all of these nodes that are moving around us of information that we now have access to. It's the information that's held. So that's a node, and it's a Rolodex of information that is attached to a foundation. So if someone lives somewhere, that's attached to a location, that's attached to a city, that's attached to a state, that's attached to a country. that's attached to a continent, that's attached to or tethered to a region of the planet, that's now attached to a planet, that's now attached to a solar system and a position in the galaxy. You see where I'm going with this? It's infinite. It's a fractal. So what we're tapping into in this Rolodex is a piece of the fractal that's infinite. So I'm just sharing this because this is how big this process is. And this is the process of detaching ourselves from these concepts, memories, relationships that are no longer part of what we need in order to expand. And so that's another video. I've talked about that before. So I'll just use the Rolodex as an example. Some of us are being called to just get rid of the Rolodex, wipe it entirely. How would it feel? We still have that experience that we had with that person, place, or thing. But that's how deeply embedded we are in the fractal of our reality. So if we're in the process of merging all of this information, all of these people, places, and things that we have connection points to, can we establish our own connection point, our own unique individual diversity, and see the oneness in everything, yet still maintain a sense of self, boundaries, which may not be the right word, but that's a good word just to kind of recognize. And now from that space, you can utilize your entire Rolodex of information, people, places, things, addresses, letters that make up the address that are from the alphabet that hold a certain tone, currency, frequency, or note, the phone number that holds a certain frequency, tone, or note, or geometric. It's like we're starting to hear the sound behind the sound. We're starting to recognize that this is all just, you guys, my whole head is like tingling right now, on fire. And there's those upgrades that I was talking about as far as ascension symptoms. Wow. I'm just going to go for it and just itch. Literally feels like my hair is out to here. So recognizing that we're processing this, right? So letting go of the need to hold on to that stuff is so important because it's all inside of you. We have access to this infinite Rolodex of information, but we're in a particular time, place, mapping on this, in this reality network. So as we create from this space, what network do we want to create from? How far do we want to extend out our roots and our branches of this new tree? I keep thinking of the, so asking, continually checking back in with ourselves, saying, is that what I need now? Is this something that's going to continue to further my expansion, or is it going to keep throwing me backwards in time? Do I want to time travel into a place where I feel more secure and I feel more stable? Or do I want to keep going back to this lifeline that actually may not be serving me anymore? And this can be anything. It can be a place, it can be a memory, it can be a person, it can be someone that we've worked with for years that we just feel like we just need to detach ourselves from. Because ultimately we're being called back to our original source. The nodes are attached to a framework, a crystal lattice work, which is attached to a bigger node and a bigger node. So it's infinite. So why lock ourselves into a schematic that no longer is able to support our expansive architecture? This could be a teacher. It could be a partner, right? And however, I'm being called to go back to, when we're going through these upgrades, again, not necessarily making that decision right now. Yes, if it's not working, move on, whatever that is. However, do it in a balanced way so that when you do move to this other point in time, you can look back and already have the closure, already feel complete in it, and not have regrets. And that's something else to keep in mind as well. And this is part of knowing thyself. This is part of using our discernment. Am I going through this huge expansion and my partner isn't ever? Or is it that we're just not going through it at the exact same time? And maybe in 6 months, they might be going through it. And by using my discernment, I can feel into that and go, you know what? I'm going to give it some time because that feels right to me. And then all of a sudden we come down from that high and we're like, whoa, I am so glad that I did not go off and leave the country and decide to move to the top of, I don't know, what's that place that Mount Everest. I am so glad I decided not to do that. Or maybe I'm so glad that I did. Because again, that's not sustainable. So people are making a lot of decisions when they have this massive surge, and then they look back and they're like, oops, I was a little unbalanced when I made that decision. So I'm just trying to kind of share that the time is now, but recognize what that really means, right? So it's like, we're not going to go on a trip without packing first. Usually, at least something, so that we can sustain ourselves, right? Okay. I went into the highs and lows. We talked about the sugar. More protein might be needed right now because of these Kundalini activations. Yeah. I'm actually just going to end on that note. And I'll do a separate video with some light language and an inflow message. And so I hope this helps someone out there watching. I didn't really go into too many details about earth changes, as within, so without. So I'm going to go back to a message I've shared before. The earth is expanding. I don't understand it all, but I see the earth as expanding. I see more land that we don't know about. I see more life under the oceans that we don't know about. I see many different places in the earth that are being activated. This is a little all woo-woo, but it's all humming. And so that's something else maybe I'll do a separate video on. Namaste, guys.